What's up YouTube? This is the reassembly video of the pw50 I got for my oldest's 4th birthday. Please like and subscribe. Here you can see we're putting the rear hub together, making sure the drivetrain is all assembled. Always good to torque your fasteners. Here I'm preparing to install the frame onto the engine. Kind of difficult getting everything lined up and making sure your cables are routed correctly. That's the only bolt that holds these two things together. The shocks are the primary support, and that's the pivot point. Here I'm routing all my throttle cables and my choke cable through the small cable corral on the frame. Getting all these things attached to the carburetor is kind of tedious. Here we're installing the CDI ignition system, capacitor discharge ignition. That's where I recognize that some of my cables might not be routed correctly. When I have that all semi-sorted out, we move on to getting the front shocks installed. You can see that small stud down there on that right front shock tube there, that fork. That's what cogs or like locks to the brake hub, and if you look closely you can see that's actually the wrong side. I'll correct this later, but the brake goes on the left side so that the cable can be routed to the right. pw50 first debuted in the summer of 1980. This bike has been around for a long time. installed in the hub, we go ahead and mount it to the forks. I do later correct the brake orientation and the fork orientation. This is all just like testing, like putting it together to see if it's all gonna fit correctly. I replaced a lot of components and ended up having to return quite a few of them because OE was best. Here I'm getting ready to put the handlebars on so I can check cable routing and connections, make sure everything is operational and going to fit correctly. You can see that connector there on the end is not a factory style connector. I recognized a few damaged connections within the CDI harness between the motor and the ignition switch there on the handlebars. And I ended up replacing two connectors in the process. That first one, I thought it was going to be the only casualty, but once this was installed, I found that the connector on the stator from the motor had high resistance as well and was damaged inside of the connection. And you'll see here in a moment, I have to repair that. And I show that process of me clamping all the terminals tight and installing it inside of the connector. Here's another indication that I may have some of my routing incorrect. I noticed that the throttle cable would not adjust into specification. Another reason I had to use OE components. So here you can see me crimping and clamping the terminal ends for the new CDI connector. So here I'm reassembling the connector now that I've got all my terminal ends attached. As I'm putting it together, I want to make sure to put the water loop back in the tail end of the connector, as well as putting a pin clamp in the front of it. Here I almost break it because I have it in there twisted sideways. Once I've corrected the connector on the CDI unit, I can then move on to the fuel line, which is tucked up on the frame rail in the same location. The Yamaha Y-Zinger, later named the pw50, has remained unchanged or was unchanged for nearly 30 years between 1981 and 2008. already checked the measurement once. Preparing to check it one more time before I cut that line and attach it to the fuel valve. Attach the line, I struggle a little bit, end up bumping the camera, but it allows me a better angle to see the hose attachment. While the hose is installed, we'll go ahead and give the fuel valve a quick test, make sure it feels nice, and then we'll carry on. Here you can see us preparing to install the rear shocks. In hindsight, I think these might be a little too heavy duty for the application. Once we get our fasteners all good and tight, we can move along to the other side. Get the other shock mounted, we go ahead and give it a couple of compressions just to see how she feels. Now that we've got most of the mechanical components installed, we can finish up some of the engine components and see if we can get her started. Here I'm installing the exhaust. I had wire wheeled that area out and kind of refinished the exhaust pipe, like the manifold, just to kind of freshen things up. Once we get this little expansion pipe mounted on this two-stroke, we'll be able to move on to see if we can get the muffler tail section on, and hopefully it'll fire right up. All it holds it on is a small rubber grommet with a hose clamp and one 10mm fastener. This is where that Loctite's going to come in handy. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave your comments below. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.